So I'm Ed Yingling. I'm a co-founder of Princetonians for Free Speech, and I'm going to be the moderator. With me this morning, and we are not sitting in the exact order for technical reasons, are Stuart Taylor, the other co-founder and the president of Princetonians, and also our intellectual leader. Next is Todd Rulon.
Notice the irony in that self-irony?
It's not your turn yet, Stuart.
Very good, there he goes again.
Next is Todd Rulon Miller, one of the many famous Rulon Millers that have gone to Princeton. As near as I can tell, there's one in every class. He's also our treasurer and actually runs a lot of what we do. He's, in effect, the chief operating officer, and he apparently survived his 50th reunion. Barely.
And beware, I'm the fundraising guy too, so you want to leave the room quickly after this session.
So the moderator has lost control after 1 minute. Also, we have Kaylee Cunningham, who's the one that makes things run, and it is the entire staff of PFS, so she can take whatever title she wants whenever she wants. Finally, we're joined by two students who will graduate this week, Abigail Anthony and Miles McKnight. We particularly thank... We particularly thank Abigail, and this is typical of Abigail. She's recovering, and she has come to be with us in difficult straits, but she's here in good shape and ready to talk. I will say these two have written great articles on free speech and have been strong and really brave leaders. I sometimes, when I read their brilliant articles, wonder where they got the guts to do it, but they do it. And they're also members of our board, so we're happy to welcome them. Our plan this morning is to use about half the time for discussion up here, and then we'll turn it over to you. We want it to be very interactive. Questions, suggestions, complaints, whatever you want to do. So be ready for that. I'm going to start with a very brief history of PFS here for those who may not have followed us closely. There's some slides up there, which I can't see, but I'm presuming they're the ones I gave her. So you can see we were founded in October by Stuart and me based on a 30-second mistaken conversation on a golf tee box. And we soon launched our website, which was a harrowing experience for two men in their 70s, I must tell you. We built slowly at first, but we thought the concept was of such importance that a year later in October of the next year, we launched the Alumni Free Speech Alliance with an op-ed that Stuart and I wrote in the Wall Street Journal. And so it's now a national movement. There are now 19 alumni free speech groups. 16 are members of this alliance, which is an umbrella group, and 3 are just newly founded. I'm just going to name a few to give you an idea. There are alumni free speech groups at Yale, Harvard, MIT, UVA, UNC, Stanford, UCLA, Davidson, and WNL. So you can see it's a wide variety. Now, last year we were able to expand our capabilities a great deal. I think a lot of that is due to Todd, who came in from Silicon Valley and gave us a little more entrepreneurial point of view than two former lawyers might have had. And also because we were able to hire Kaylee, who's really helped us improve and grow. In June of last year, we launched a formal alliance of faculty, students, and alumni on free speech. This is the first such formal alliance in the country, and we're fortunate that at Princeton we had a really strong group of faculty led by Robbie George, I'm sure all of you know about him, and by the students in something called the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, and our two students here were leaders of that, and we'll hear from another one later. Last year, we started holding events on campus, and Kaylee's going to talk more about that and what we're planning for this year. And finally, this week, we announced our poll of Princeton students on free speech, which is the most in-depth poll of its kind ever done on a campus, and we're going to talk more about that. So in the next slide, maybe, here you see the purpose of PFS, which has not really changed since we started. That's the purpose. The goal is really, and it's a reach goal, I'm afraid, is to try and turn Princeton in a place that really values free speech and academic freedom and open discourse. Our approach has evolved somewhat over the over the last couple of years. You got to remember, this whole concept didn't exist 3 years ago. So we've learned as we have gone. And there are a number of things we do. I'm going to let you read them, but we'll talk more about them as we go through. But these are, in effect, what's in our toolbox to try to promote free speech. So now I'm going to turn to the panel, and again, be ready with questions and comments and other things later on. So I'm first going to call on Stuart. Stuart, PFS has spent a lot of time in recent months working on the issue of we're against removing, I should make clear, I'm about to misstate that, removing the statue of John Witherspoon. We went and all had our picture taken with the statue while we were here this weekend. And I think that's an example of how we use the spotlight and our own capabilities to try to affect change. Now, this was a question, 2 questions in our poll, and we didn't know what to expect from the students. So the first asked what the students thought about removing the statue, but the question was based on the knowledge at the time of this petition from a bunch of graduate students to remove it, and that was largely based on a Princeton project on slavery and Princeton, and we have now proven that that there are things in that description of John Witherspoon that are just not accurate, and Stuart will talk about that. But when we just asked that question based on what was known at the time, or thought to be known at the time of the petition, the results were 35% strongly or somewhat favored removal, 39% had no opinion. My guess is, Todd, and you talked to some students, 50% of them really didn't know what was being talked about at the time. But 35% were strongly or somewhat favored removal, 39% had no opinion, and 25% were strongly or somewhat opposed to removal. So a slight tilt in favor of removing it. But then we gave them some new information, which I think Stuart will talk about, that was uncovered during the process, believe it or not, from the tax records of New Jersey back at the time. And when we gave them that information, it flipped. There were only 22% for removal and 43% against. So it'll be interesting to see what the university does based on a minority of students that are in favor of removing it. So, Stuart, you want to bring us up to date on this?
Sure. First, I've got a technology challenge. How do you turn this thing on? Is it on? Yes. Good. Thank you. And I'll sit because, as Ed will tell you, if I don't preempt him, it won't make it any harder for you to see me than if I stand. Princeton's administration has for a year been considering the petition to remove from the plaza near Firestone Library and the chapel the bronze statue of John Witherspoon that the trustees led enthusiastically, very enthusiastically, by then President Harold Shapiro put there in 2001. And I've been led to understand by someone who knows Shapiro that he still feels strongly that it was the right thing to do. PFS, that's us, has worked for many months to defend Witherspoon, who did more than anyone to make Princeton a great university in 26 years as president, ending his death in 1794. As a signer of the Declaration of Independence, he was also a hero of the American Revolution. Not a military hero, but when you signed that thing, I now know, I'm not sure I knew it a long time ago, you were likely to be hung unless the revolution succeeded. Anti-Witherspoon critics call him unworthy because he owned 2 slaves and opposed immediate emancipation of all slaves. We disagree emphatically with their conclusion. The debate continues, and I'll elaborate on why we disagree emphatically. Critics rely on the harsh account by the Princeton and Slavery Project in 2017, which until very recently has never been criticized by anyone. But Bill Hewitt, class of '74, has done some research and cast some doubt on their conclusions about Witherspoon. The project accused Witherspoon of helping make America, and all these are verbatim quotes, a cradle of slavery from its very founding, of denying enslaved people their humanity, and of retaining ownership while exempting himself from the moral philosophy he advocated to his students. Sounds like a pretty bad guy, doesn't he? Historical research has exposed these accusations as grossly incomplete, harshly misleading, and I think deliberately slow. It shows that Witherspoon always favored gradual emancipation, always from day one, always favored humane treatment of slaves, and reasonably expected slavery in America to end far sooner than it did. The invention of the cotton gin around the time he died probably changed the market situation and greatly increased the market for slave labor. In articles published by PFS this winter, Witherspoon scholar Kevin DeYoung dug into tax records and concluded that he had very likely moved by 1788 to emancipate his own two slaves, who were probably received through his second marriage, and to give them the economic means to succeed. The reason I use the modifier probably is the tax records are a little ambiguous, and so you have to kind of connect some dots in order to figure out exactly what they mean. But I think this is a pretty fair reading. PFS called in a March 1 open letter to the trustees for the revision of the project's deeply flawed account to reflect this critical new information. There has been no change by the trustees or the administration. They have not updated anything to reflect new information. In April, Bill Hewitt, 74, published in the Princeton Tory Witherspoon's defamation, that was his headline, which PFS also highlighted on its website. Hewitt showed how the project's account twists and omits facts to disparage Witherspoon. For example, the Princeton Slavery Project ignored his leadership in the Presbyterian Church's 1787 adoption of a resolution for abolition of slavery. Still, no change has been made. DeYoung wrote that Witherspoon was more enlightened on the issue of slavery than many of his generation and less personally complicit in the evils of slavery than men like Jefferson, Madison, Washington, and Franklin. And I would add, if Princeton cancels Witherspoon, those four will be next. A couple of further details. On April 21, there was a scholarly symposium. There's a plan for another in the fall. As I think Bill Hewitt again has written, initially there was an assurance from the people running the symposium that it would be filmed and that would be public for people who couldn't come to the symposium itself. After the symposium, where some light doubt was shed by Bill, among others, on the project's work, it was said that they decided, after all, they're not going to make the video public. I think PFS has played a substantial role in focusing attention on pursuit of the historical truth by countering a reductionist woke narrative that undermines academic freedom. And I'll stop there and move on. Thank you.
I just say, Stuart, and you might want to comment a little bit on this, that this is an example of what we do to shine a spotlight and organize the defense, because I don't think it would have happened in this way if it was not for us. And we organized, there are a lot of heroes here, including this expert DeYoung, but we organized it and we shined the spotlight on it. Another thing is, it's very interesting to really, we never met Witherspoon, but what a hero. He saved Princeton. He not only signed the Declaration of Independence, he served in the Continental Congress. He was the major responsible person for New Jersey signing the Constitution, and if you know the history of the Constitution, it almost didn't make it. And then if you understand his Presbyterian philosophy, a lot of it was, I don't think we should throw people who have been a slave out on the street. We need to have a transition where we give them the means to succeed. Do you have any comments on that, Stuart?
Yes, all that is correct, and I think part of one conclusion I would add is we've been critical of Princeton administration in the past on this or that issue. I think the way this Witherspoon matter is resolved will tell us all a lot about the Princeton administration. Thanks.
Todd, you want to give us an update on Princetonians itself and maybe talk about why we did the poll and what we intend to do with it?
Sure.
Or whatever you want to talk
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I'm Todd Rulon Miller, class of 73, and I did survive the 50th. And when I was here watching people at the 50th, I thought they were really, really old. So I felt I need to be young. So I did a cartwheel or two and a sis, boom, boom, ba to try and approach that. But like many of you, if not all of you in this audience, I loved Princeton when I was here. The diversity of what I had, and it ranged from sports to academics to friends and cap and gown, stories for which I can't fully let you know about, but they're just great times. And I graduated a Russian history major because it was the Cold War, and I thought, if they're going to win, I better know how they are and think. But luckily, that propelled me into Silicon Valley. That was an accidental victory. And I spent my time in California in technology. But I watched back on Princeton, and even from a distance, grew very concerned about a diminishing level of honesty and objectivity on the campus. And we'll have students here capable of talking more about that. And it wasn't just which ideology are you in, it was the beginning of repression and lack of candor, I thought, in the environment. And it started with Tillman, or even before, and went through the current president. So I've watched the erosion of this without ideology, that free discourse, fair discourse, and free debate was just being extinguished on the campus. So I got out of my technology run about 1.5 years ago, called my cousin Bill Rulon Miller. Remember, my great-grandfather gave a gymnasium, so many of us got in here. No, I'm just kidding. But my brother Chris in the audience did get in here through that. No, just kidding. But so I called Stuart and said, who was my cousin Bill Rulon Miller's roommate. I said, Stuart, what are you doing now? If you don't know Stuart, how many of you know about the book, The Duke Lacrosse Case Fiasco? Okay, constitutional scholar, and he'll be humble about that, but read that book if you want to know the facts about truth and how things can go awry. So I'd read the book and stayed in touch with Stuart, found out what he and Ed were doing, and I said, man, this is the Ed and Stuart show. We just got to get some juice behind this sucker and get the mission out. So that's Silicon Valley. Sorry about that. So I joined about 2 years ago, and that's my whole entry here. And my job has been to work with them. They have the intellectual content, mission, and depth of that, and I'm helping with the operational side and driving it forward. That's really what I do. So in terms of my first slide here, I'll go through this very quickly. In our modern world, the website is everything, as you know, and they did a good job to have a content-oriented promotion website. And you all are probably connected to it. If you're not, do it, because we put out a lot of information on free speech. We feature Princeton and issues that relate to that campus, but also around the United States in education. Let me just get this back. And but I did notice, as a modern website kind of guy, I said, boys, and we have to upgrade this thing a little bit. So we're having a brand new website come out in the next several weeks that will be highly interactive, have a lot of graphics and pictorial, and we'll do a lot of promotional stuff that gives more information. The current website we have has garnered about 1,400 subscribers. There are about 70 or 80,000 Princeton alums in the world. So we have a total addressable market where we can increase our numbers. And it's all about education. We don't go out there ideologically at Princetonians for Free Speech and say go right or go left. We promote ideas and debate. So we just want people to be more aware of the campus situation, the students, the environment, the faculty, and what's going on, so they can be informed. And you all being here today know something about that, but more need to know. We didn't have an event when we first started because we didn't know what one was. We, I think, hosted 7 this past year, and we'll have a fall campaign that will just amaze you in terms of speakers and their capabilities. And we're doing that again, not to promote ideology, but to get intellectual content on the campus to expand so the student can really look at that and go, I'm for it, I'm against it, let's talk about it. And Kaylee will talk more about that on our program side. The key thing also with Stuart and Ed was we knew about great students like Miles and Abigail, They are members and or leaders of the POCC, which is the sort of conservative coalition, though open ideas on campus. But we didn't really invade that student population without resources to do so. We've done a lot of that in the last year. We now have a bunch of students on internship with us, and we're engaging with them to find out the truth at the street level all day. Not looking just for problems, but where are the opportunities for free and fair discourse. And so you'll hear more from them in a minute, which is more important than my speech. We continue to think that content and producing that for Princeton alumni is critical, so you can understand the tenor of this and who's moving ahead either at Stanford or not, et cetera. And we will continue to produce a lot of content, a lot of programmatic work on campus, which Kaylee will talk about. And then partnerships. People have come to us and said, well, we support James Madison. Should we support you? Is there conflict or competition or tension between you? Not at all. Robbie George is a dear friend of us, and we conspire, I was going to say, we do plan together to do promotions and events of the common mission, which is free speech. And so we're very close with them. We're building partnerships on the campus with the Tory, the local newspaper, the Federalist, and legal societies, et cetera, and POCC, and others such as ACTA, FIRE, and the others. So we're a conglomerate trying to leverage one larger voice about this topic. So next slide, Kaylee, if you would. So partnerships and expansion there is critical. And finally on polling. So I'm from a real determined business background where you measured everything. And it was either website hits or subscribers or important revenue. I kept saying to my startups, no, revenue is a lot of important things here, but guys and gals. So we discussed some time ago measuring where we are in terms of free speech and having a poll that is somewhat unique now and has been finished on this campus to find out from a scientifically polled group of students, what do you think about this? And so we started working on that late last year, took about 90 days to put it together interactively with College Pulse, which is an extremely reputable group that does the FIRE student polling and does many campuses, and they know what they're doing. We spent a lot of time on questions, not to make them slanted, but to try and get answers back on where students stand on issues. And we've given you results there for the first time, and we'll talk a bit about those. And we didn't mean to promote or purport some ideology. We don't here. We're the rainbow coalition of ideas, frankly. We just want fair debate and free discourse. And so that went through lengthy engagement of release, and you've got the information today for that. So I'll just summarize and pass this on then to Kaylee about events to say, we're the little engine that could. We are the mouse that roared. We are a few people, but we are not going to give up on promoting this mission, which is critical. And our belief is that the loudest voices in this country aren't the majority, nor are they on this campus. Princeton students come here brilliant, willing to listen and learn, and they just need to know the education of possibility and also the style of what we need to do to have that discourse. So, and you'll hear more about that from our students. So it's just been a pleasure to be part of this group and to drive some of this. So thank you so much. Kaylee?
You said you weren't going to steal all my content.
Well, we'll grab it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. My name is Kaylee Cunningham. My official title is the Director of Outreach and Communications for Princetonians for Free Speech. And I do want to thank you all. I know we also have some supporters who are here. I started the fight for student free speech when I was a sophomore 8 years ago, not here at Princeton, at a university in Pennsylvania. And I have not stopped that fight since. So I was really excited about a year ago when I got the opportunity to join the Princetonians for Free Speech team and kind of help them get to the next level and really make a difference. I can say from experience, and I'm sure Miles and Abigail will back me up, that this fight is not easy to do alone, and sometimes you don't know if it's ever going to end. And the idea of having alumni support is really empowering. Knowing that you have people who want the best for their university and the students who are going there now is really special. So thank you all. And yeah, Todd kind of covered a lot of what I was gonna say, but we went from having no events on campus. There was one event last reunions, And then this year we went to co-sponsoring 7 whole events through the 2022-2023 academic school year. Some of those events that we kind of headlined alongside with POCC, which Danielle over here runs, was having Greg Lukianoff, the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. He came and spoke last month. And then the month before that, we had Professor Robert George and Nadine Strawson, formerly of the ACLU, have a conversation on some things they agreed on and disagreed on. So that was all very exciting, and we're looking forward to this coming fall. We already have 3 really exciting speakers booked. In September, we're going to be hosting George Will. October, we will have Mitch Daniels come to campus, and then finally in November, we're going to have Heather McDonald join us here. So we've got some really big names coming up, which is kind of the idea that we gain some notoriety, make some new incredible partners, and be able to kind of increase our impact to change culture on campus, get students comfortable with discourse again, which, as you can see, everyone has the polling results at their table. That is definitely something we need to work on, and the students who took that poll helped us identify that having events that show us how to have discourse is one of those things that they think could help. Another exciting kind of update over the past year is we've really increased our relationships on campus. So as you saw before, one of our goals is to support students and student groups. So not only have we strengthened our relationship with the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, but we're also working with Federalist Society, the Pre-Law Society, Whig Clio, just to name a few. There's some other wonderful student leaders that we know as well. And then finally, I'd like to give you a little preview. It's just a screenshot here, so nothing too special, of our new website that we'll be launching this summer. It is more interactive, as Todd mentioned before. Basically, if you want to be a supporter, there's now going to be a way to do that through an online platform. No more just mailing checks to South Carolina or California or whoever wants to go check the mail. We will have a donate button. And then one thing that I think everyone will find particularly exciting is we'll have an events page. So you can very easily find what we've got going on. And then also all of the articles that we post, which if you subscribe to us now, we have a lot of really great content. There's going to be a comment section, so you can log in and have discourse about free speech, which is a wonderful thing. And so we hope you all are looking forward to that and will enjoy it. Please let us know if you think there's anything we can do to make it even better. And yes?
Quick question.
Uh-huh.
Will those events be available virtually for those of us who aren't by the campus?
Yes, so Robert here is excellent. We aren't streaming right now, but we do record them and post them after the fact.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, including the 2 events that we had, the Greg Lukianoff and Nadine Strawson. Both of those events are available online now. And so will this one, if you want to look back and say, here's what they told me about this group, and you want to show your friends.
But we may be able to stream by next year through, next year, the umbrella group has developed a system for our members to stream, so we may be able to live stream it next year. Some of these events.
Would you tell them where to find the events that are already up?
I don't know. Where do you find the events that? Well, they're on our website, right? They're just on the front page of our website. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can essentially we kind of mix in a blog with our articles currently on the current website, and so I believe one of the very recent articles that you'll see posted there has the links to those events that we hosted this spring.
Kaylee, two questions. One, give an example of, say, the Pre-Law Society, how we partnered with them. Basically, we buy donuts, I think,
Yeah.
but it helps.
Yeah. So one thing that will get people to an event, as you all are proving to us right now, is food is a really great thing to have at an event. And so, yeah, if a student club is hosting an event that, like I said, models discourse or kind of touches on free speech, we are willing to help them financially with making that event as big of a success as it can be. So, for instance, I think we we did 2 events with Pre-Law Society, and I think 2 with Federalist Society this year. And for those, we pretty much helped with catering. It's also basically, I think, tradition that the speakers get taken out afterwards. We help pay for those dinners, buy posters, help with advertising. That's mostly how we're doing it when it's another group that we're
And then
supporting.
hopefully, if we can, the first week of June, we're going to start a monthly newsletter because now we just post things, but the newsletter will enable us to give you perspective on what's going on rather than just rifle shot things. So we'll have a monthly newsletter coming up.
Yep, a newsletter, and then we also have been opening up programs for students. Matthew, who checked probably most of you in, he is our communications fellow, so he's helping with social media and does some writing from time to time. And we also have a writing fellowship. So another way we want to support students is helping them build their resume for a cause they care about.
Okay, thank you, Kaylee. I'm going to call on our 2 great students now. First, Abigail, congratulations on your graduation. Abigail is off to Oxford to study linguistics, which is well beyond anything anybody in my class could have done. So that shows how great the students are. I would like you to comment on 2 of the questions in the survey and more generally what it's like to be a student at Princeton, and particularly a conservative student. Both of you have written, as I said, incredibly brilliant and also brave articles about things going on. But here's 2 questions that maybe you could talk about because I think you have some experience in these areas. One question asked students whether they felt administrators and faculty have tried to indoctrinate them. I think the answer should have been yes, but 41% thought they had, at least to some degree, but it was much higher because we can cross-tab for conservative students versus liberal students, and as you could imagine, it was much, much higher for the conservative students. But 41% overall thought that they were attempts to indoctrinate them.
Let me just ask a question. Who was included in the survey? There are 8,000. Who was surveyed?
Campus Pulse, which is the survey firm that FIRE uses, you all know, and they do a national.
What is FIRE?
FIRE is the national strongest free speech group. It's Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And they've done an annual poll, I think, for 3 years that covers 200 colleges. And some of our questions overlapped with them. We work very closely with FIRE. But the College Pulse does this for a living. So they have in colleges all over the country a panel of students. So we didn't have to go out and invent it. They have a panel of students that they've developed to do polling of. And so it's the plus or minus, which in a political poll might be 2%, was higher in this, but it's still good. And it's a very, very solid poll. So the other question I wanted to just put on the table, and you have some experience in this in the ballet club to some degree, but this actually is something that happened on the Princeton campus. We asked if a student thinks it's appropriate, we asked the students, do you think it's appropriate to suspend or kick someone off a team if that person says something that hurts someone? Incredibly, 40% agreed strongly or somewhat that it was all right to kick somebody or suspend somebody off a team. By the way, if you did that, it would be a complete violation of the Princeton free speech rule. Question whether it'd be enforced. So, Abigail, give us some comments in this area.
Okay, so alumni often ask me what it is like to be a vocal conservative on campus. Imagine I invited you to take a campus tour, but I told you that somewhere there are 2 landmines and we have no idea where they are. Would you still take the tour? Probably not. That's actually not an accurate comparison. Instead of 2 landmines, there are upwards of 100. You don't need to step on the landmine only within a few hundred feet. You'll lose limbs, and instead of garnering sympathy, people will make fun of you. I discovered here that I have a God-given talent to trigger landmines in the culture war trenches and spark intersectional terror. I worked part-time as a reporter, and I quickly learned that even straightforward summaries of campus events will anger students. So here's a handful of the headlines I've published. Number 1, Princeton hosts the Fat Sex Therapist for talk on the 4 dimensions of fat phobia. Number 2, we love masturbation, correct? Princeton University hosts drag show featuring student and guest performers. Number 3, Princeton lecture highlights erotic relations between blackness, soil, and dead matter. Number 4, ecological restoration is like gender confirmation surgeries, trans river scientist tells Princeton students. And 5, Princeton to offer course on black plus queer bondage. So here's how students responded. The Instagram account Decolonize Princeton posted a photo with my face and asked, when will Princeton hold conservative writers on campus accountable for targeted harassment of faculty and students producing queer work? In the caption, the account stated the university has allowed a hub of alt-right coverage to fester on campus, and conservative writers use their position as Princeton students to disrupt the campus community and invite vitriolic hatred into it. Apparently, I've espoused every phobia known to mankind. I've been accused of things I've never done, such as having an affair with a professor. I underwent surgery this month for endometriosis, and one student wrote something along the lines of hoping that I never wake up from the anesthesia, which was deleted rather quickly. Yet I am not aware of a single instance in which a student contacted my publications with a fact-checking note to issue a correction. Not once has someone suggested that I wrote something false. Moreover, I have not seen a single op-ed response by an undergrad to anything I have written. However, the Daily Prince has published several satire articles ridiculing conservative groups. The progressives haven't attempted to argue with me. Instead, they exhaust themselves insulting me. The threats directed at me are warnings to others, letting them know that if they share my views, they'll face similar antagonism. Recently, I reported on the Daily Prince Senior Survey. I wrote that a majority of conservative seniors and nearly half of moderates reported being uncomfortable sharing their views. In response, one undergrad tweeted, "Is there a way to make them more uncomfortable? Because it doesn't seem to be working." And another tweeted, "Conservative voices are being silenced? God, I wish it was working." I'm not the only undergrad to face such hostility. Every POCC member has been called racist, fascist, white supremacist, and a Nazi. In 2020, one undergrad took the university ID photos of every student who signed the POCC letter and posted them online. He instructed fellow students to maintain tabs on them, make it suck to be them, and he added that it should be threatening. A member of the student government cropped the 4-page POCC letter to show only the signatures, then sent it to a college listserv with the caption, "Putting the signature page so we know our fellow racist, but not the whole letter because I don't want to upset more people with useless racist propaganda." I assume she meant to say racists among us and not our fellow racists. Due to the extreme backlash students face on campus for expressing a dissenting viewpoint, Miles and I adopted a new rule when we ran the POCC together. Any published letter would feature the names of the authors, and the signatories would be redacted. Unsurprisingly, the number of signatures tripled in a year. Yet even on the condition that students wouldn't have their name published, some still refused to sign because they worried the letter would circulate among the administrators and jeopardize funding applications for research and summer internships. When students self-censor, they do so because they have practical fears of social and professional consequences. So what's the cure? If students are afraid of professional ruin, then perhaps they need to see dissenting students thrive professionally. Of course, some of the burden falls on us, and it's our responsibility to maintain good grades and be diligent workers. But the alumni can be of assistance. If you're in a hiring position, consider sending the job opening to the student leaders of free expression or conservative groups and let them be the first to apply. When undergraduates publish articles or make our events available through Zoom, you could do us a big favor just by sharing it with a few friends because we don't have large platforms of our own. Since fewer students are willing to be outspoken dissidents, that means the student leaders of conservative-leaning groups have to take on more responsibilities with each role, and we appreciate any help you can provide, whether that means connecting us with potential speakers or simply sharing our event advertisements on social media. If you think a student has written a good article, then send an email saying so. Quite frankly, there isn't a big difference between 50 people and 500 people attacking you. But there is a big difference between 5 people and 10 people supporting you. I can't remember all the nasty tweets written by peers, but I do remember the many nice emails I've received. Most importantly, do not give unrestricted financial gifts to the university. Instead, give whatever you can. Instead, give whatever you can to the few initiatives that are dedicated to free expression. Many alumni want to save Princeton, but I regret to inform you that there isn't much left to save. Thank you. Ice Scriber hurt.
I think that was a gong in favor. Abigail, both these students are, in addition to everything else they do, are superstars in the arts. And Abigail, I believe you were with the Philadelphia Ballet, is that correct?
Yes.
Would you talk for a second about what happened at the ballet club?
Yes. So prior to attending Princeton University, I was a professional ballerina. I joined the undergraduate ballet club here. It's just recreational. We do a show once a semester. After George Floyd's death, the three or so student leaders published a letter saying something along the lines of ballet is a white supremacist art form. We need to decolonize ballet, and every possible crazy thing you can imagine. I did what any conservative student would do, and I immediately sent the materials to Rod Dreher, and he published a scathing article. Later, I published my own article in National Review, basically arguing in 1,000 words that this is ridiculous. Of course, I faced immediate pushback. I was removed from group chats, blocked from certain things. The students were saying very, very mean things about me. And so all of this is to illustrate the point that there is no space free from wokeness. If you can't do ballet without having to hear about white supremacy, then there's no space on campus in which you can't escape this obsession with race. The reality is, Ice Gruber encouraged students to adopt anti-racism missions and initiatives when he released a statement in 2020 saying that we need to look for racism wherever it is on campus. And the students followed that directive. They did reorient all of their clubs towards the mission of anti-racism, no matter how irrelevant that was to the club's purpose. And so there are many more examples of this. I think Miles has a similar story as it relates to the orchestra. But it should just show you that no matter where you go on campus, no matter what type of club, the reality is you will face these hyper-political initiatives.
You left out one of my favorite word in the attack on ballet was perfectionism.
Oh yes, perfectionism is white supremacist. Just a newsflash in case you didn't know.
But you think about ballet, well, yeah. So Miles is going to stay on and work at the Witherspoon Institute with Professor George. Prior to going to law school, I will make a prediction that I think Stuart and I will share, and that is within, 4 years, 5 years, he will be a Supreme Court clerk. So, Miles, I'd like you to address what more Princeton should be doing on free speech. I would note that this year in orientation, we worked hard on this. Last year, the year before, the orientation attacked free speech. This year, the orientation actually had a section promoting free speech. And it was, we worked hard on it, but these two were primarily responsible. They went and chewed on the administration to get it done. And Miles gave a brilliant speech at orientation on free speech. I want to read 2 questions for you, Miles, and then you can take it away. We asked how familiar students are with the university's free speech rule. Now, the president of Princeton is going around touting this. 18% said they were very familiar. Should be 100%, right? Another question asked students what you would like to see done, and the idea with the most support, this has been referenced, was to have debates on controversial topics, and it was amazing to me that 60% said they would support that. But what do you have to say in this area, Miles, and what suggestions do you have?
Well, thank you, Ed, and thanks for having me speak today. I'm happy to close with some reflections on what I think more the university can be doing, but not first without providing, I think, some theoretical nuance to the sense in which we should value free speech, in which we do value free speech, and I think that sort of understanding will have implications for what I think the university can do to foster an environment where the truth-seeking ideal, the truth-seeking mission flourishes. So we've been using this term free speech several times today, and we all loosely understand what is meant by it, but I want to say, actually, none of us in this room believe that we should have free speech on university campuses. We really don't. In fact, we think that professors should be able to require students to write essays and that the essays should be topical, and we support standards in academic work and so on. All of these are standards or restrictions on speech, which of course don't mean that it's not free speech in the sense that the term is used in American political life. However, we are really interested in a certain sort of freedom, which is the freedom to explore any idea and to propose any idea and put that out there in the academic ether. And so that's academic freedom. So the two concepts are distinguishable: free speech in the political sense, which is not the way the term is used by Princetonians for free speech or by free speech activists on campus, and then academic freedom, which is the mode of free speech that exists in the academic climate. So what accounts for this distinction? Well, it's the fact that at the university we have a common goal, a mission, and that mission is the truth-seeking mission. We're committed as members of the university community to a particular project, and that project has as its orienting feature an ideal, and that's the truth-seeking. And there are a number of practical requirements that follow from that ideal. One of them is the conditions of freedom, namely academic freedom, to pursue any idea or to propose any idea, to consider any argument. But that's only one condition. That's only one practical requirement of the ideal. There are a number which we should be interested in as people who support the truth-seeking mission that I think the university really should take into account in promoting, in promoting a culture or a campus community that really does pursue the truth well. Now, of course, on the one hand, the university has an obligation, and now a legally enforceable obligation, given what they've adopted in rights, rules, and responsibilities, which is the university's governing charter, the Chicago Free Speech Principles. They have a legal obligation to protect free speech, and this they do rather well, I think, actually, with one exception, and that was the Joshua Katz case. But in a formal sense, the university, I don't think, is going after people for speaking their minds by imposing any sort of official or formal sanction on them. The threat, the real issue, I think, is actually a cultural issue. It's a cultural issue, almost entirely. And this is really the great insight that the survey results show. The survey shows is there is not, among undergraduates and among, broadly speaking, people of our generation, mine and Abigail's generation, there's a very weak regard for not only free speech, but the other norms required by the truth-seeking mission. That includes really cherishing dissent, looking for opposing points of view, engaging with it, being intellectually humbling yourself intellectually. And it's that cultural issue which is upstream from the university experience, which is really troublesome. And I think that's where the university has an obligation to try to at least foster a culture that makes it easier not to fall into that camp. And that's really hard, and this is why free speech activists overlook this question. It's really hard to influence cultures, because cultures shift with time, of course, long time, and students are only here for 4 years. Now, that being said, I do think there are things the university should be doing and working on, and can do to promote a culture of cherishing dissent. One thing, I think the DEI apparatus has got to go. I'll tell you why. The reason why I said truth-seeking is the ideal of the university, and that's true. But the university is increasingly populating its administrative bureaucracy, and Abigail has reported on this, with staff, DEI diversicrats, basically I call them, who have a conception of university life and the purpose of university life, which essentially supplants, in some sense, truth-seeking with social justice activism. They view the university as fundamentally a place where, in principle, they'll say the two can be reconciled. You can have truth-seeking and you can have social justice activism. Of course, it's ridiculous. It's BS because it presupposes the validity or the truth of this or that form of social justice activism. But inasmuch as they've begun to supplant the truth-seeking mission with that sort of vision of the university life, it's inevitable that you have an administrative culture that, of course, is not going to be friendly in any way to promoting, enhancing a culture of open dissent, viewpoint diversity, and so on. So that's a broad thing that alumni, I think, should call into question, is question the university's ever-growing, faster than the population of India, the DEI apparatus. Another issue is the issue of institutional neutrality, which PFS has done a lot of work on. That's the position essentially that the university should adopt something like the Calvin Report, which is an active sort of principle or set of policies at the University of Chicago, which maintains that administrative departments, official units of the university, shouldn't be making statements on controversial political issues, except to the extent that making such statements is necessary, strictly necessary for the functioning of the university. So there's no reason for the chemistry department to be putting out a hyper-partisan and hotly contestable diagnosis of the racism problem in chemistry, because then they immediately brand as outsiders those members of the department who dissent, or they suggest subtle parameters around the scope of acceptable discourse. So that's one way of not exacerbating an ailing culture. Freshman orientation is, of course, another important thing. I'll just say, I was really honored to give the speech that I gave last year to the freshman class. I don't think it was a firebrand speech. I think I was, Abigail thinks I was a little too milquetoast, I think, in this speech. But I stand by the content of what I said. Now, even just having me there as someone who's known on campus as a conservative provoked a lot of backlash and controversy, and there were a lot of articles, I think no less than 5 or 6 written about my speech in the Daily Princetonian, notwithstanding that the content, at least the theoretical content of what I was saying, was in harmony with what President Eisgruber was saying about free speech, because at least in theory, he tends to say the right things. But I'll just say, the freshman orientation fight is not over. Next year, they've scrapped that program and replaced it with just a conversation between President Eisgruber and an outside scholar. And it's worrisome because President Eisgruber has fallen in now to the camp of the typical trope of, let's reconcile DEI and free speech and free, it's, to remain vigilant is what I'm trying to say. And then, of course, the institutional neutrality issue is a big issue in freshman orientation as well. So I just want to conclude there and say this is a cultural issue. It's not attitudes, dispositions, intellectual humility, all the virtues that go along with being a truth seeker are what are at stake. It's very difficult for the university to address it. It's more of a generational thing. But there are things that we can call on the university to do to take steps to rectify some of the really bad indicia contained in the survey that PFS just released. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. I think that's a very important point about it's a cultural problem. A couple of data points. Robbie George had a reception Friday, and some of you may have been there. But he pointed out 2 things, one disturbing, and that is we think students come to Princeton and all the other schools. By the way, through this alliance, it's going on everywhere. Princeton's not unique in this arena. But Robbie George was pointing out that increasingly the students come here already indoctrinated. Another good point was he said there's an all-time record number of students, 250, that are involved with the James Madison program, and that's very encouraging. I'm going to open it up here, but I wanted to start by calling on another student. Lest you think we're losing 2 fantastic students, but we are developing a deep bench on free speech, and I wanted to ask Danielle Shapiro if she would comment on all this. Danielle is the current president of the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, and again, that's the student free speech group. And she's worked with us on several events, and we're looking forward to working with her. So we have some outstanding star students coming up. Some of them are here, and Danielle, would you like to comment? And then we'll open it up to everybody else.
Absolutely. All right, we can hear me? Yeah, so I don't think I can say anything following Abigail and Miles on the student leader thing that will top them, because they've really been 2 of the best leaders that I could look up to. For context, my name is Danielle, and I am an incoming junior, so I'm pretty new to this fight, relatively speaking. But when I came into Princeton, I was not planning on getting so involved. If you had asked me in the abstract, do I support free speech and all of the wonderful work PFS does, I obviously would have said yes. But I came in as a molecular biology major. I was not planning on getting into the weeds of this, definitely not on any journalism level. And now journalism is actually one of the things that I find most rewarding on campus and in general, reading journalism and doing it as well. But when I came on campus, I was a molecular biology major, and I soon realized that even as being a bio major, I would just be sitting at lunchtime having conversations with people, and people were just not willing to hear me out. And I found it very difficult in classes because I did take not only STEM-related classes. My freshman year, I took some history classes, politics classes, and I just found walking around campus that some students weren't willing to listen, and that some of the ways that the institution, the Princeton institution, was made up was not conducive to free speech. And that quickly frustrated me. And I do credit a lot of it to student leaders like Abigail Miles, some other dear friends of mine, who really did inspire me to enter this fight in a more active way. And I'm really, really grateful. And I think what really thrusted me into this most of all is I had a particular experience last spring where I was just reporting on an anti-Israel event on campus, and one girl who I quoted her for something, and it was totally fine in the moment. She didn't like how her quote was perceived afterwards, so she essentially got the university to use a provision to protect students from sexual assault and harassment. She took that to be able to silence me and stop me from reporting in the future. And that was, this was very, very tough for me. I was getting emails from the sexual assault Title IX office for a random girl on campus. It was absolutely absurd. And the craziest thing is when I went to the university, and Miles was right there by my side, really the guiding light through all of this, they doubled down, which was the craziest thing of all. When given the opportunity to rectify that in the fall, they changed the policy to allow this, because beforehand it had been a loophole, but now it is a practice anyone could use as long as they jump through the right hoops and duck and roll at the right time. So I think that really put me in perspective of how insane the university is when you're not keeping tabs on them. So I think PFS is really the best group out there that can combat this, and they're the best partners any student organization, any student independently or as a group could look for. So if you're looking to help students on a student level, we're excited about our future, we're excited about the fall. PFS is really the best way that you could support us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Danielle. This reporting system sounds nuts, but it's in a lot of campuses. You may have read about Stanford, where somebody was reading Mein Kampf and got reported for reading something that was probably assigned. Okay, open it up. Okay, let's go all the way to the back there, and then on you.
Could we hear from some other students if they're willing to speak before we? I found that fascinating.
Yeah.
The students are incredible. Would anybody else be willing to talk about their experience on campus?
I would like to hold that if I could, because we've done some of that, and I want to make sure we get some of the other questions here, and then we'll come back.
We've heard a lot about the DEI bureaucracy and the heavy hand in that bureaucracy. Is there evidence that the university or the DEI enforcement branch of the university actively monitors the online presence of students or faculty or administrators to see whether there are expressions by them online that are found to be objectionable?
Dear Miles and Abigail.
That's come up at other schools.
Yeah, I have a comment on it, but Miles and Abigail would have. Have you seen that directly?
No, not that.
Yeah.
Not that directly. Matthew Wilson, who's here, has written an article about bias reporting and abuse of the bias reporting system to advance basically social justice causes. But it doesn't happen. Princeton still, to its credit, is not yet the Soviet Union, not yet North Korea. So no.
Give it 5. Well, that's
But,
it could be worse.
okay, I want to come back to that because actually it's a broader issue on campuses. So if we have time and that'll enable another good student to talk, let's go here.
Great presentation. Two quick questions and one comment. class of 99 involved?
She's on our board.
She's on your board.
Yes.
She is involved.
Yes.
Number two is a question, and that is, you mentioned that culturally there has been, culturally, if Samantha Harris is on your board, okay.
Yes.
Great, class of 99. The, back in the Middle Ages when I was an undergraduate, the concept of free speech being controversial was unthinkable. I mean, how could that become such a cultural issue? And I'd like someone to comment on how this ever happened. To have an organization like this in the 60s would never have happened because there was no need for it. And but before on, I'll make a comment real quick. I highly recommend this terrific letter in the PAW that I wrote about a year ago. It has to do with DEI in athletics, and it resulted from John Max, the new AD at the time. His first action was to create a new position in athletics, which, as we all know, is a meritocracy among meritocracies, for an associate athletic director for DEI. He hired someone, he didn't last very long, but I understand that that's been replaced. So that is my comment for when you go home and you retain your past PAW, check out that letter.
Okay,
So-
I'm going to go all the way to the back, then to the orange hat here. Well, they both got orange hats.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, Abigail.
Oh, hello. I'm that certain.
I'm going to let Abigail answer the question. I heard the question,
Sorry.
I forgot the answer part.
Sorry. So the DEI engine at Princeton is relatively large. We don't know the exact number, but they do have over 70 employees specifically dedicated to DEI. That averages to 1 for every 80 undergraduates. I inquired about the salary ranges, pretending I wanted to apply, and it turns out that they get paid about $75,000. For contrast, the graduate students make about $40K. So it is a very expansive bureaucracy. And yes, there definitely has been a cultural shift. I think maybe 5-10 years ago, there was this idea that words are violence. So if you said something that people disagreed with, then you were actively committing violence and actively harming others. I think we've shifted beyond that. Now we have this idea that silence is violence, and silence is taking the side of the oppressor. So now it's not just saying something that dissents, that is considered harmful, but rather the fact that you don't actively affirm the creeds du jour, then you are sort of taking the side of the oppressor. So, for example, if you don't have your, among undergraduates, if you don't have your pronouns in your email signatures, or if you didn't post the black square during the BLM activism, then that was sort of a signal that you weren't fully on board, and that was enough to signal that you disagreed and dissented in some respect.
Can I say something? On the number 70, what Abigail's talking about, 70 people who their job is officially DEI. The DEI coordinator for this, the DEI coordinator for that. Of course, that overlooks the hundreds, I think, of low-level sort of underling administrators who have drank the Kool-Aid, and who are fervent DEI zealots. And just to give you an example, the example that Danielle Shapiro shared about the no contact orders, she and I both had no contact orders taken out against us because we asked, in her case for reporting, in my case because I asked rabid anti-Semite whether or not he believed that Israel should be wiped off the map. So he got at a protest, by the way, which he arranged, and I asked him this question. So he got a no contact order against me. Now, the people who granted these orders were not DEI administrators, no. They were directors of student life, people that undergraduate students have to interact with in the day-to-day life at Princeton, and developing their course of studies and arranging housing and going through all of that. And just didn't think critically for a second about the fact that granting the order on that basis is not only just reprehensible in terms of common sense, but is also just a plain violation of our university's free speech policies. The administrators who have the most intense concentrated interaction with students have zero familiarity with the free speech rule. The ones at the top know it, of course, which is why when Danielle and I went to a dean at the top, a very reasonable woman, Dean Joyce Shui, who I like a lot, she had the orders lifted almost immediately. But you know, students aren't interacting with her all the time. They're interacting with the low-level ones, and they've just totally drank the Kool-Aid. So 70 officially, in reality, hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, when a group of faculty protested the university itself's attack on Professor Katz, when they did a show attacking him as a racist, the review of that went to the DEI bureaucracy. The DEI bureaucracy rules on free speech at Princeton, which is not unusual. Yes, sir.
I'm that certain Bill Hewitt who was mentioned earlier a couple of times, and I wish to state for the record that my personal or preferred personal pronouns are tiger, tiger, tiger. And following up on the earlier questioner, I'd like to direct your attention in PAW Online now, and it's relatively easy to find. There is a great article coverage of what was also referred to the April 21st John Witherspoon in historical context. And I attended that symposium myself. I'll just sum it up as I thought this was Princeton at its best, something that whatever perspective anyone might have on any issue, you'd like to get the word out that this at Princeton is how we can address, discuss what can be sensitive and controversial topics. But it was superbly well done, as well as substantively highly informative. And there was mention made that we'd been promised videos of the program. The program was put on video, and now the administration is taking the position that these videos will not be made public. I think this is wrong any number of ways. I've tried to get an answer. I received no response. And I've had an open letter to President Eisgruber on this. But going back to the PAW online article, if you just go to paw.princeton.edu, type in Witherspoon in the search, it should provide you a link to that article. Once you're at the article, there happens to be a concerned reactionary alum of Princeton, as he sometimes refers to himself, who writes a letter that got published praising this article, but also expressing concerns about the withholding of the video, and also underneath that, the failure of the Princeton and Slavery Project, which I support, is a very good undertaking. What is most unfortunate is that the essay about John Witherspoon, which essay, if you Google Witherspoon slavery, comes up as the foremost search result, and in content, it's the one that goes deepest into the topic. And if you read a piece I had in the Princeton Tory, April 19th or 18th, I believe it is so off the mark that it is utterly defamatory and not entitled to free speech protection under the university's rights, rules, and responsibilities. I could go on at length, believe it or not, but I'll try to contain myself. And, but one of my second concerns in my letter to the PAW Online is that as the Princetonians for Free Speech have found with their, I think it was March 15th or thereabouts, open letter to President Eisgruber and the rest of the trustees, calling upon them to take advantage of the DeYoung Scholarship and to update the website so that people, anyone who's interested in the topic of Witherspoon and slavery, whatever you think should be done with the statute, and people can disagree on that. But this essay is a false lighthouse, misleading all, and the university, not only the project has failed to update and be responsible, but the administration, all the way to the top, most regrettably, is, for reasons I simply don't understand, not willing to address that, hey, we have new learning, or we may have gotten some things right earlier on. We have a duty as Princeton University to provide, in the words of W.E.B. Du Bois, to tell the truth about all these things, insofar as the truth is ascertainable. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Ed, we're pretty much out of time. If there's one question, we could probably fit that in.
I wanted to ask Matthew to talk because we wanted to hear from a student, and we could have two more real quick questions. We'll move real quickly.
Okay, we only have the room till 11, just so everyone's aware.
So I need Matthew. Does he want to make a comment? Yeah.
I can address the topic of the online speech, and Miles brought up the bias reporting. So Princeton's DEI office does have in place a system in which a student who is made uncomfortable by another student's speech can file a report with the DEI office alleging bias or harassment, and then the DEI office would then evaluate the speech to see whether it merits disciplinary action. Also, I would note that even in a case where the DEI office determines under Princeton's rules that they can't take any action because the speech at issue, the so-called bias or harassment, is protected under Princeton's free speech policies, they can still pursue extra disciplinary actions, such as imposing a no contact or a no communication order on the student, even if the speech is found to be protected. So it's a really troubling system. There are dozens of such cases. There's dozens of such bias reports filed each school year. I think in the past few years it's been about 100, a little bit less, a little bit more.
Do you have the stats, Matthew, on how many of those go through the extrajudicial or whatever resolution process? Or is that a rare? That's possible in principle, but does that happen much?
So I think the imposition of actual disciplinary action is far less than the number of bias reports that are filed, but I don't believe the DEI office publishes what percentage are assigned to the kind of extra disciplinary penalty. In other words, the no contact order. I would note, though, that under Princeton's policy, they essentially grant no communication orders upon request.
That's true. The reason why this whole thing seems radically unnecessary is because our free speech policy, which can be found in Rights, Rules, and Responsibilities, section 1.1.3, it's the Chicago Free Speech Principles, already has built into it all of the exceptions that are part of our sort of American constitutional free speech tradition. So harassment is not protected, right? Incitement is not protected. Threats is not protected. Defamation is not protected. So why do you need? It makes no sense why they would need to have such a system in the first place.
Yeah, I would just point out that this is not unique to Princeton. In fact, there's a company that does this for a living. Lots of schools have them. Stanford, others have them. Okay, real quick, Abigail. Then I can only take this one and the orange hat, black shirt, orange hat. We're going to have to vacate the room. Yeah, we're going to have to vacate the room, but we will be out there to talk to you at the end, so you can ask us anything you want. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm from class of 74. So your question of how on earth did we get here was very powerful for me as well. My fondest memory was the Buckley-Schlesinger debate sponsored by Whig Clio, and that, in my day, was the ultimate free speech experience where an arch conservative and an arch liberal got to respectfully debate, were listened to, nobody booed. I was invited to the dinner beforehand where around the table were people of all political persuasions. This was during the Vietnam War. You can judge for yourself, the full spectrum of opinions and ideas around the table. These two debated throughout the dinner respectfully. Each listened to the other. Nobody shouted each other down. Nobody hated each other around the table. It worked. So somehow we got from there to here. What worries me about this is that I'm one of your supporters, but I want to make sure that even within this group, this is not just another highly conservative organization, and everything we heard today is from the right. And from my perspective, right there in the center, there is as much Holocaust denial, white supremacist, they hate me, neo-Nazi stuff happening on the right. And so it's harder for me to align myself with an organization that feels from this breakfast very different from what I see when I get your newsletters and I read your articles, and I love what you're doing, but please keep it even-handed.
I really appreciate that question a lot. Yeah. Thank you. One of the I actually wrote an article recently on whether the POCC, my group, should be considered a conservative group. It was called the Conservative Coalition, but it's actually not. It's the Princeton Open Campus Coalition. But one of the most common sort of criticisms or doubts about POCC or PFS has been that, it's just a conservative group using the free speech fight as sort of a fig leaf for cultural war grievances and so on. And so the question is, whether PFS or whether POCC, I'll just speak for POCC because I was the president of POCC, is conservative. And the answer is really is rather complex, and there are several levels. So, of course, in principle, the free speech fight, you're exactly right, is not conservative, it's not liberal, it transcends sort of the political binary because it all occurs in the pursuit of truth, right? And that's everyone supposes that they propose reasons and arguments and so on because they're true, not because they're liberal and conservative and so on. So yes, it's important to be principled and to apply the principles that we espouse and defend equally between groups. We should be just as ready to defend the speech of progressives, no matter how progressive they are, as we are conservatives. And it's true that Abigail and I at least are conservative. Now, the other question though is, in practice, so in theory then, POCC not conservative. And in fact, then there's a question in practice. Now, actually, the majority of speakers we've brought to campus, the POCC have brought to campus, have been left liberals, classical liberals. Whether we're conservative, it's painfully clear, though, right now, which speech on college campuses is being targeted, which speech is the object of sanction, social reproach, and so on. And it's across the board. I think virtually almost every college except for the colleges like Bob Jones University, I guess. Conservative speech. It's conservative speakers who are heckled. It's conservative students who don't get the position in that club or that club because they espouse conservative points of view. Now that's a contingent fact. In 30 years, it could be exactly the other way around. And I would have no excuse in 30 years as a conservative if progressive students who are younger than me were getting silenced. I would have no excuse not to, if I didn't speak up. I would have an obligation to apply the principle evenly. So yes, POCC is conservative in a sense, and it's because, first of all, the students who are doing the fighting now just happen to be conservatives. They're the only people, and the Republican Party really is the only sort of political organization among the two parties that is taking the issue seriously. Conservative students are the only ones who are doing anything about it right now. Conservative professors are the only ones leading the fight. The Chicago free speech principles at Princeton were only adopted because a group of conservative professors got together to put them, to propose them. But the reason the conservatives are interested in it now, I think, is because of the contingent fact that it's conservative viewpoints that are being targeted. So it's a complex question. Conservative in a sense, but not in theory, and always important, of course, to remain completely principled.
Stuart, to comment,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, we're just going to take one, but we'll
45 seconds?
let Stuart talk. I'll give you 45
I'll-
seconds.
I'll add a
then
brief-
I'll give you, and then we'll go out.
Two brief comments to add to what Miles said. First, just speaking on the liberal conservative thing. Personally, I've never called myself a conservative, not once in my life. I've called myself a liberal, but I stopped doing that a while ago because I don't like the polarization. I call myself a moderate. I've been called conservative. But in the larger frame of history, free speech has always been unpopular with the powers in society. Kings hated it. Emperors hated it. Popes hated it. Dictators hate it. They still hate it. And the reason I think most of us grew up being taught that free speech was a great thing, and it was championed by Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, both slaveholders, by the way, but let's forget about that, is that that was the spirit of our founding in this country. But it wasn't until the 1920s, the U.S. Supreme Court for the first time ever enforced free speech principles. And it's only been in recent history, when we were in college, there was a fairly even balance in terms of the cultural climate between left and right, liberal and conservative. And I think free speech principles were widely respected, especially on the left, because the people who thought they were going to be silenced were people on the left. That is what has changed. The balance of power in our culture has shifted dramatically to the left. And therefore, the people who feel beleaguered, the people who are afraid of being silenced, tend to be on the right and tend to be moderates. There's a lot of great liberals. Nadine Strassen was mentioned earlier, head of the ACLU for about 10 or 15 years, a longtime liberal, but a great champion of free speech. I think some of the great champions of free speech are liberal, but if you look across the broad population, free speech is kind of in eclipse on the left. And we're hoping to bring it back to the center, because we think monoculture, which some call it, which is conformism, as Greg Lukianoff was mentioned earlier, he called it the conformity gauntlet in higher education. That was the title of his talk. It was a little too esoteric for people to appreciate. But the idea is, when all you do is talk to people who say things that you like, it makes you stupid, no matter how smart you were to start with. I'll stop there.
I would just add that in order to be a member of the national organization, there are 3 requirements, and one of them is your free speech group must be nonpartisan. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ed McCarthy, 81. Important conversations never had. Colleges quietly end mandates without addressing harms. 300 alumni from Dartmouth came out to that conference. We just compelled several classes of Princeton undergrads to accept an injection of a substance that no doctor or scientist can give you the list of everything that's in it because it's redacted. That is a violation of the Nuremberg Code. I've had to become the world's leading advocate for the Nuremberg Code in the last 10 years because all the medical ethicists have dropped the ball on it. We had the 75th anniversary last year, and there's not a single article in any academic journal on it. Here are all the letters that I've been writing to the university since April of 2020 about their policy and how they've been treating the students. Okay, none of them printed. They're in a book. I'm done. 45 seconds.
Okay. Are there copies of your book? Do you have copies of your book available to people?
I'm looking for people that are going to do something about it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take...
That copy of the Nuremberg Code for people in 12 languages for people that aren't aware of what's in it.
I'm going to take one quick question here, and then again, we'll be available out there. Okay. Kaylee wants you to know that you can take your stuff with you.
Yeah.
And
Take
again,
extras and give them to
we'll
your
be
friends.
I just can't do it because we're getting kicked out of the room. But I'll be glad to. We'll be glad to talk to you outside. Yes, sir.
My name is Ed Terry Atkins, class of 78. Just finished my 45th union. I had a comment I'd like to make, which I think will hopefully cheer us up.
Good.
It was as a result of this reunion, where I had the great pleasure of sitting at lunch with a freshman who was in the classics department. Abigail, you mentioned how all of a sudden ballet is a product of white supremacy all these years we never suspected. Well, apparently the classics department was a product of white supremacy, and some of us were a bit shocked that all of a sudden the classics department no longer requires competence in Latin or Greek to graduate. And so it's just been transferred into a sort of a comp lit course. This student, who was a classics major, told me everybody in his department thought that's ridiculous. He told me that most of the professors also thought it was ridiculous. It was demeaning what it means to be a classics department. So this Alice in Wonderland that we are in, there are people who realize the reality behind it. I would like to end with one question to the two of you, and that's this. Do you think this suppression of free speech that we're seeing is top-down driven or bottom-up driven, i.e. the students that come in from high school are already imposing it on the administration is imposing it on the students, or the two just get along so well?
They do get along so well. But first, I don't see why that opening part is particularly optimistic. It seems to me that all the people then disagreed with it and didn't say anything. I mean, I don't remember seeing a single article from one of those professors who disagreed and said this is stupid. So that's actually terrible. Everyone thinks it's ridiculous, but they're doing it and they're fundamentally altering the major for the sake of virtue signaling. So I think that's actually a terrible, depressing anecdote. Sorry. Sorry. And yeah, so I think it cuts both ways. I mean, I mentioned that President Eisgruber released a statement in 2020 basically encouraging everyone to look for racism even where it might not exist. The demand exceeds the supply, and so all these students reoriented their efforts. There are institutional bodies within the university that are encouraging this. So the McGraw Center for Teaching explicitly states that teachers should basically call their students out for sort of discriminatory and biased remarks, which is a blatant contradiction of our own policies. And so I think it's all over the place. I think the DEI engine is really promoting this ideology. I think the junior faculty are going along with it because they're afraid of stepping out and not getting tenure. I think some of the students are arriving pre-indoctrinated, but the DEI engine is basically running the freshman orientation in a way, and they clearly establish what the acceptable views are, and that just sets a tone for the 4 years. So even if you aren't thoroughly indoctrinated when you arrive, your first week as a freshman will sort of set you on the ordained path that the university has chosen. So it's not just one factor, it's a lot.
Okay, first I want to thank, again, we'll be out here to talk to you further. I want to thank all of you for coming and listening to us this morning, and we encourage you to spread the gospel about Princetonians for free speech. I don't think those of us from PFS need your applause, but how about for all the brave students?